sometimes I think the image of New York is undeserving because a lot of people don't believe you exist up here. You get outnumbered and outnoised by some others, but this is a demonstration I think shows that there are a lot of people in New York that still loves freedom. I know this was rather on the spur of the moment, that's why it's especially nice to see such a grand crowd, but I would like to introduce my family that's with me today, and they're over on this corner. My wife Carol is there. Hello. I have my son Ron and his wife Peggy with two of their daughters, Lisa and Linda.
Welcome.
But it is great to be here, and a lot of activities being going on, and I know everybody keeps up with the internet and the campaign. But a lot of people have been making comparisons to where we are now compared to the last go-around. And believe me, we are way ahead of where we were 4 years ago. A lot of people want to, I don't know whether they're serious or whether they're joking, but they're trying to say that Ron Paul is now mainstream. Well, maybe those on the mainstream that used to be in the mainstream have come our way and incorporated this into the system. Now, there's a big difference. It was occurring during the last campaign, but it was dramatic. And when the financial bubbles burst, the housing bubble burst, things that we've been talking about for so long and Austrian economics explained many years ago. And when that occurred, a lot of credibility was gained for our views. And this, to me, was nothing new or sensational or special because I was motivated to get into politics in the 1970s. When I saw the final breakdown of the gold standard in August of 1971, I just knew that this would usher in an age of big spending and big deficits and financial bubbles and eventually a big collapse. Unfortunately, the Austrian economists were right because nobody heeded them, but here we are in this mess. They were right. The real tragedy is, of course, that nobody had been listening to free market economists that knew exactly what was going on and knew exactly what they should have expected. So we now are very much engaged, this country, in trying to clean up a mess. And unfortunately, since 1987-88, with the discovery that we were in deep trouble, we have done everything wrong. And it's time we figure out how we got here. How can you come up with a solution if you don't know how we got into the problem? So, basically the problem had been that we've been living beyond our means. We spend too much. We tax too much, we borrow too much, we regulate too much, we undermine personal liberty too much, and then we print too much money. So with the great wisdom of Washington, what did they do as soon as they discovered there was a crisis? They spent more, they taxed more, they inflated more, they regulated more, and then all of a sudden then they said, well, we have to print a lot more money. We have QE2 and QE3 and who knows what. So far, everything that they've done in Washington has been wrong. The truth is when you have a crisis this way, you understand it, what you want to do is correct the mistakes. And we haven't done that. You have to liquidate debt. Under those circumstances, what would have happened if the free market people were in charge in 1988? Guess what? Those banks and those corporations that had been ripping us off and making a ton of money with all their dealings and wheeling and dealings, and the military-industrial complex, the whole works, if they got into trouble, guess what the free market says? Liquidate them, let them go bankrupt. That's what should have happened. So what happened? Washington felt like the tremendous urge they had to do something, just as they did in the Depression. I guess they figured the last Depression and big Depression in the 30s wasn't big enough, so they're working on one much bigger. So this is a desperate struggle for us to come up with, the common sense answer. But politicians can't keep their hands off. But what they ended up doing was they took all this bad debt and all the speculation, all the derivatives, and guess what? They dumped them on you. They dumped them on the American taxpayer. What did they do with your money? They further destroyed your money. They liquidated, they did this by buying them up, putting them in the Federal Reserve, and buying them with Treasury. And guess what? Who got bailed out? The people who were benefiting. They get the bailouts at the same time who got the penalties. We, the people, ended up owning the derivatives. The middle class got smaller and poorer. The jobs were lost. The houses were lost. And they said that when the crisis hit in 2008, they said that, you know, if we don't do something, it's going to be a depression. Well, guess what? They did it. You ended up with the depression, and the people who gave it to us, they got bailed out. There's something awfully wrong with that system, and it needs to be changed. But basically, the problem is much bigger than tinkering with the budget. The budget is very important, but I see that as a symptom. The budget is big, and the deficits are big because we're living beyond our means. But the basic question comes from, what should the role of government be? The founders of this country understood that question, did not like the role of the king, did not like the role of the British government. They wanted to change it. There was a revolution, and they did their best in writing a document that worked fairly well, but has been abused. They did this, and they asked the question that what the role should be, and they came up with a conclusion that at least at the federal government level, the federal government was there to protect our liberty, give us a national defense, give us a sound currency, permit interstate trade. But other than that, stay out of our lives and stay out of our wallet. So that is the question I believe we are required to ask. What should the role of government be? Luckily for us, we've had a good suggestion, and that is our Constitution. It's not a perfect document. There's room to make changes when necessary. But the tragedy we have now is that there's a lot of people in Washington and around the country that has had so little respect for the Constitution. So what we have chosen to do is allow those individuals just to ignore the Constitution. And so if they can ignore it here, there, and there, such as in the monetary issue or declaring war or writing laws, if they do that, there's nothing left to the rest of the Constitution. So along comes a crisis. 9/11 was a major crisis time. So they say, well, yes, we're having some problems. So rapidly, right after the 9/11 event, they rushed to the floor, a document that they basically had written many years ago, and where they were looking for the opportunity, and they say, what we need to do is we need to repeal the Fourth Amendment, which they did with that unbearable Patriot Act that should have never been passed.
Yeah.
The personal liberty has been challenged, and that is very natural. The one thing that we must remember, Randolph Bourne, when he wrote during the First World War, he said, and his title of a book was War is the Health of the State. And we have too many wars going on. Not only the wars overseas, but there's a war against the American people. There's a drug war going on. And believe me, all of these is the health of the state at the detriment of our liberty. That is what we have to get reversed. Some of the areas that I have noticed in campaigning here in the last several months, the difference between a few years ago, and you notice it even in the rhetoric of some of the opponents, the other candidates, and that is they're beginning to know and hear from the people that 10 years in Afghanistan is enough and we ought to come home. Yeah. I've been arguing the case for that for a long time. I believe in a non-interventionist foreign policy, something that something the Constitution permits and dictates. At the same time, we got strong advice from the founders to mind our own business, not get involved in the internal affairs of other nations, and not to be the policemen of the world. It seems like that the majority of Americans are slowly learning now, but the people in Washington still are not learning the lesson very well. And that is that if you look at great empires and great countries in the past, they usually self-destruct by expanding themselves around the world too far, and they finally just destruct and their empire ends. But you would think recent history, we could at least remember back to the 1980s when we saw the collapse of the Soviet Empire, because what were they doing? They were engaged in an unwinnable, ridiculous war in Afghanistan. You'd think we'd learn by now. So of course we want to stop those wars. Just think that we have not had a declared war since World War II. The Constitution says you only fight war when the Congress declares it. The Congress is supposed to reflect the will of the people. But we haven't declared a war, and we haven't won a war since World War II. But not only should we stop these wars and come home, defend this country, and not defend all those other countries or the special interests of all those other countries, but economically, just think, we're in this economically mess that we have, and spending is a big problem. And all that talk we heard last week, barely was there a whimper about cutting militarism. You know, they talk about, oh, we can't cut defense. I say there's a big difference between defense and militarism. You can cut militarism and it actually helps your defense.
Yeah.
And not only should we bring the troops home from the Middle East, what about Germany? Do you think we should be defending Germany anymore?
No!
And what about Korea? Do you think South Korea could handle North Korea? You know, matter of fact, I'm quite confident that Korea would be a unified state if we weren't over there. And they would finally come together. That's what happened in Vietnam. We finally had to leave Vietnam. Of course, what were we warned? We were warned that, oh, there would be a domino effect and communism would, you know, roll us over and take over the entire world. Well, what happened? They became more westernized. China tends to do pretty well in the banking business. They have us as a customer now. So in Vietnam, just think of the foolishness of that. The French and the Americans, how many people were killed? They believe that over 1 million Vietnamese were killed, plus 60,000 of our people were killed over there. And now, all of a sudden, we have to leave. We come home. And they become more westernized. We trade with them, we talk with them, we travel, we invest over there. My argument is much more can be achieved in peace than with war. So we don't need to be in Korea or Japan or Europe, and if we bring those troops home immediately, there could be some immediate benefit to us rather than boosting the economies of Germany and these other countries. So a lot could be done, but first we have to change the attitudes of people and their understanding that their best interests are served not by depending on government, because governments fail, and they are failing, which is helping our argument right now. They fail, and therefore we have to look to something else, and we don't have to invent it. It's called liberty. It's called liberty, and it works. A lot of people have told you over the last several years, and looking at this, they say, yes, it's true, the budget's out of control, we need to do some things, but everybody has to sacrifice. You know, I don't buy into that. If I came to you and said, I'm going to give you your freedom back, I'm going to get rid of your income tax, I'm going to give you a sound currency, I'm going to enforce property rights, and I'm going to leave you alone, and you don't have to sacrifice anything. Would you feel like you're being sacrificed, or would you feel energized to go to work? So we do have to change our attitude about the monetary system and financial system and the foreign system. But the monetary issue is something that I have dealt with for many years. Matter of fact, it was the issue for me in the 1970s, believing that the loss of the link to gold would lead to the problems that we have. But we have not followed the Constitution on the monetary issue. There is no authority in the Constitution to have a central bank, which means there's no authority to have a Federal Reserve System.
And the Fed! And the Fed!
And if we don't end the Fed quickly, we should do exactly what we've worked so hard on the last couple of years, and actually had it passed last year in the House of Representatives, and that is audit the Fed and find out what they're doing and who they're bailing out and who their buddies are. You know, when the first TARP fund bailout came up, it was in the middle of the election of 2008. So two major candidates rushed back to Congress to vote for it. Tells you that, generally speaking, both parties accept the same principles. But the idea of the Federal Reserve being involved, the TARP funds were huge, close to $1 trillion. But the Federal Reserve was involved in manipulating and rotating $15 trillion. 1/3 going to foreign banks. And then when you ask them questions, they say we don't have a right to know if they don't want the transparency that we demand. So we need to know what they're doing. I think if we get the transparency we need, and we're getting a lot compared to a few years ago, that when the people know about it, they'll know, especially when they see their money losing value like we're in the middle of doing, they're going to say enough is enough. But the Constitution is clear, no central bank. But what is gold? What is legal tender under the law? Gold and silver is legal tender. But what happens if you go out and say, yes, that's a good idea. We have American silver dollars and gold dollars. And what if we went and started exchanging those like some have? What has happened to them? They get put in prison. What happens to the big and they get charged with counterfeiting by using American money? But what happens to the true counterfeiters? You know, they're heralded as the saints, the ones that run the Federal Reserve. They give us our prosperity and they get us out of trouble when we get into trouble. But they're the counterfeiters, and right now the American people are starting to realize that the Federal Reserve is responsible for so much of our economic harm. I believe we're now at a stage where we are going to see rapid deterioration of the dollar. You say, oh, how could that be? You know, this week the markets were in turmoil and everybody was buying dollar and treasury bills. But when you go to the grocery store, your dollar's not doing as well as it used to. And that, I believe, is going to get a lot worse. I think prices are going to start to go up a lot more, and this will be a big issue. Now, what we have to do, though, is make sure that the blame is put on the right people. Of course, the government spending money in debt is facilitated by the Fed always buying this debt. But there is a limit. As powerful as the opposition is, whether they're in the government or in the Federal Reserve, the market is even more powerful. And the market can win. And we can win this fight as well. We can win this fight when we point out that it's liberty we need, and we need sound money, we need property rights, we need responsibilities for ourselves. That will help us and take care of us, and we don't need the government. The government's failure is giving us credibility. It's not only with we who might consider ourselves conservatives and libertarians. We are gaining the respect, and we are gaining support from a lot of independents and even a lot who call themselves progressives and liberals, because they like the idea that we're tired of these wars and we want to end these wars. They have a very open mind to the Federal Reserve and transparency of the Federal Reserve. They like our position on the fact that we believe in liberty, that we allow people to run their lives as they please, and we don't want to dictate to people their personal habits, their religious habits, or their intellectual habits. So I sense as the time goes on, so many coming over, and frequently I will have individuals in the crowd that will come afterwards and they'll quietly say, you know, I'm one of those liberal Democrats that you've been talking about. And the one thing, and then they'll be very serious, and their big concern, why liberalism has prevailed is that we have been very wealthy, and they could consume that wealth for a while, and it seems like they were helping some people, helping poor people, and who can be against helping the poor people? That's why I happen to believe in free markets, because that's what really helps the poor people.
Yeah.
Well, I usually point out to those individuals individuals who have this sympathy for helping the poor and having the safety net I understand your position, but you have to understand it's not working. And if you want to, you have a social security system that has no money. You have a federal government educational system that doesn't work. You have a medical care system that's just deteriorated, and all it does is undermine our freedom of choice and give poorer quality care. So we can win that argument on the practical side of it. But of course, the strongest argument is the principled argument. The principled argument about why this system of government based on personal liberty is so much more superior, because it recognizes something very basic, and it is not an economic issue, it's a moral issue. It is, why are we important? Why are our rights important? It is because we are individuals. We are born, or we are born with, or God-given rights to our life and our liberty. They don't come from our government at all. And if that is the case, what we want to do is legalize your freedom of choice. I don't know if you've read, or whether you're interested in it, or whether you've read stories on the internet, but there are quite a few people, more than I ever dreamed there would be, that are interested in making their personal choices on nutritional products. Yeah. And I think that's very important. That's very important. I'm a physician. I have certain medical viewpoints, but on the other side, politically, I'm open to all. And as the years go on, I'm open to the alternative cares as well from a medical viewpoint. But you should have choices. You should have a choice to what you want to do. The whole idea that the federal government can come in and arrest you for buying raw milk from another customer may across the state line, that should end. That may not affect all of us, but the fact that they can attack our liberties does affect us, so it's the principle as well. But what about this whole notion that many states now are saying that, and they limit it, it's a very narrow legalization. Allow people who are sick to use marijuana for medical reasons. People who have had cancer and other diseases, and they find it helps them. Why? You know, then the states actually are sympathetic with that, and they write a law, and they say that it is now legal in this country, in this state, to do such and such. Why in the world should we tolerate a government, and sometimes they call themselves compassionate conservatives, to march into a state with federal officials with guns blaring and go in and arrest sick people and put them in prison? It makes no sense at all, and this drug war ought to end.
Yeah.
The whole thing is, part of this argument is that whether it's nutritional products and the various items, it is regulated, and it is frequently designed by those who are in the drug industry. Those are the special interests. Sure, they'll say vitamins are good as long as you buy them from us instead of you make up your own mind. And this is why, whether it's domestic, and now they're even talking internationally regulating these substances through the World Trade Organization, we should not put up with this, and we should do whatever we can to stop that from happening. Of course, when you talk about the WTO wanting to regulate substances like that around the whole world, I mean, we should look also at what else they like to do internationally. As conditions get worse, they think the solution, you know, in our country, it's generally been, well, we need more federal government. And then when the individual countries are messing up, oh, we need more world government. So here we are right now engaged in what I consider an atrocious amount of entangling alliances. It is the reason why I've taken a position that we don't need the entangling alliances. We don't need to be in the United Nations, the IMF.
Yeah! No New World Order.
Yeah. A lot of people want to paint us, they say, oh, you're a bunch of isolationists, you don't want to do anything. But guess what? Those individuals that complain about me not voting for these NAFTA and CAFTA and WTO agreements are the very first ones who want to put sanctions on country and cut off trade with anybody they say they don't like. why is it that we can't even trade with Cuba? I think it's about time we started trading and traveling with Cuba, having an influence there. But we have a long way to go, but I think the basic understanding of what liberty is all about. I love the philosophy of liberty, not only because I think there's a moral defense of it, which is the reason I believe in it, but there's no economic downside to it. So if I could be a free person but poorer, I'd rather be a free person. But we don't have to make that choice. The freer we are, the more prosperous we're going to be. So there is no downside to it. But also, what else does it do? It brings people together. Because if you believe in liberty and freedom of choices, all of a sudden people come together. We understand this pretty well on religion. We don't test people to come into a group and say, well, you're going to have different religious views down the line. But as soon as it comes to economic views, oh yes, I don't want you to spend your money on this, you have to spend on this, you can't buy for this person, and it's very overly regulated. So when it comes to personal habits, that's when all of a sudden there's both conservatives and liberals feel like, oh, we have to protect you from yourself. Governments can't protect you again from yourself. That is your responsibility. So therefore, this idea of tolerance is a very good idea, and you have to remember, tolerance does not mean endorsement. Just because you tolerate somebody's freedom of choice in religion, you don't endorse their religion. So if you have less laws saying that you can run your life as you choose, and actually if you wanted to, play poker or something like that, you shouldn't be regulated by the government. But today, of course, the government feels like they have to regulate all your habits that you have. So a free society is so compelling that it brings people together. It causes more prosperity. And a very important reason why I love this philosophy is if we're truly looking for peace in this world, this is the philosophy that you have to have. You have to have a philosophy not only of tolerance of our neighbors and allowing them to lead their lives as they choose, we have to have a tolerance of other countries and not believing that we can impose our will on them. You know, for many years I complained about the fact that we only have two choices on our foreign policy. And I lament the fact that, we go around and we push ourselves on other countries, and we go in and we always want to have our guy in charge. So we go in and we say, look, if you be our dictator and you do what we tell you, we'll pay you, we'll give you a lot of money. So we put them on the foreign aid and give them all their weapons or whatever they want. And every once in a while, no, quite frequently, they switch, and then we have to get rid of them and put a new dictator up. But if that individual says, no, I'm not going to do it, or they switch, like a Noriega or somebody, then we have to go and destroy them or bomb their country. So we offer them either money or bombs. And I thought, why don't we offer them peace and trade and get along with them? I made a mistake on there because there's actually a fourth option. And the fourth option is what we're seeing in Pakistan. Because in that country, we're bombing them, we're giving them money at the same time. Makes no sense whatsoever. Now, the country is bankrupt, and that's a very dangerous thing to happen because it can usher in serious disturbances politically. But in many ways, it's an opportunity. I mean, as a country, we've worked ourselves to this bankruptcy, made the wrong assumptions. Now we owe $3 trillion. And if we can channel this in the right direction, a lot of good can come from it. When we offer them something that has been around, we don't have to invent it. We can improve on it. The gold standard's been around a long time, but even our gold standard was far from a perfect gold standard. We can offer them something better, not just going back. Freedom is a very new idea. It's only been around and tried several hundred years. And unfortunately for us, living today, we are seeing the results of a deterioration of the confidence in belief in freedom. So in the last 100 years at least, I would say we have been having a steady erosion of liberty. I mean, starting in 1913, that was a bad year.
And the Fed!
Federal Reserve, the income tax, the change in the foreign policy and the way we elect our senators, all the rejection of the local government element and shifting this over to the federal government. So this is an opportunity. The conditions are right for our views to prevail, but it will take a lot of effort. Today we're engaged in a very important election process, even this next week. Although in the scheme of things it sounds rather minor. It's just another straw vote. We've had straw votes here and there, and sometimes we do quite well with those straw votes. But next week is a bigger straw vote, and that's the one in Ames, Iowa. If we can do well there, it will send a strong message. So we are working very hard there, and I know a lot of you have helped and contributed and encouraged us to do that. But if you happen to know anybody in Iowa, call them up. It'll make a big difference, I'll tell you that. So it can be a close election. There was one straw vote a year or so ago down in New Orleans, and we lost it by one vote, a single vote. And yet symbolically it would have been nice because they always announce the winner. So some of these races can be close, so a few votes make a difference. But we're working very hard there in Iowa. We're going into New Hampshire a whole lot, into South Carolina, and now into Nevada. But believe me, the establishment, politicians and the establishment otherwise, are not going to be complacent because our numbers are growing, and they know it, and they know there's something wrong in this country. And what they really know is that we have the answers to the problem of this country, and it's in the point, it is just fully understanding what freedom really means. So I thank you very much for you being part of this movement. Thanks a whole lot.